Okay, sir, we are on the Speaker Truth with Mark Ross. I am your host, of course, and I have with me Mr. Terry Tucker. Uh, I read your profile on Matchmaker. I think that's where we met,
Yes.
and I just want to ask you some questions. And I know we spoke just a few minutes ago. You went to the Citadel. Is that a military school?
It is. First of all, let me say thank you for having me on before we start. Yeah, the Citadel is a military college without the requirements to go active duty when you graduate. You can, if you want. You have to take ROTC the 4 years that you are there. But
Okay.
unlike the service academies that require a certain commitment, the Citadel does not. But I went there, in all honesty, Mark, on a basketball scholarship. And so, for me, it was the ability to play Division I college basketball, which, I couldn't pass that up, especially having had 3 knee surgeries when I was in high school. I was lucky to play in college.
Yeah. So you must be pretty good if you have 3 knee surgeries and going to a D1 school.
Yeah, I mean, not to brag, but I was pretty good. I played in Chicago. I played in the same conference as an individual by the name of Isaiah Thomas, who
Mm.
went to Indiana,
Mm.
won a national championship with Bobby
Yeah.
Knight, and won a couple NBA championships with the Pistons. So yeah, I got good because I played against good competition.
Yes. Yes. Iron sharpens iron, as they say, right?
Absolutely, you're right.
Yes, sir. Uh, Also, I wanted to, I guess, talk about your profile in the aspect that you worked in corporate after college, correct? But you became a cop. Talk
Yeah, I
about
did.
that. Talk about that for a second. Talk about that transition.
So if you look at my resume, it does kind of look like a Super Ball went off in the room, so to speak. I started out, my first 2 jobs were I was in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. And then I became a hospital administrator. But there is a backstory to it. So my dad's father was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954, and in 1933 was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury, he was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in going into law enforcement, excuse me, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But that's what my father wanted me to do. That's not what I felt I was supposed to do. So when I graduated, my father was dying of cancer, and I had a choice. I could have said, "Hey, Dad, I know you're dying, but too bad. I'm going to go blaze my own trail."
Hmm.
Or out of love and respect for you, I will
Hmm.
do what you want me to do. So, understanding that backstory now, I went into business because that's what my dad wanted me to do. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. And I'll be honest with you, Mark, one of the things that I am most proud of in my life is the fact that I never let my dream die. I knew this was what I was supposed to do. I
Hmm.
mean, I was a hospital administrator, I was making good money.
Hmm.
I could have been like, this is fine. I'm comfortable here. But it was like, no, I want to give this up and do all the things, that we do in law enforcement that don't make it conducive on family and relationships and things like that. But I did have the support of my family. And I am so glad that I did that in my life.
Wow. So, if you don't mind me asking, how old
Sure.
were you when you transitioned from administration to the police force?
Old. I was a 37-year-old. I was, excuse me. I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which, as that's pretty old to be getting into that line of work. And
Yes.
I mean, fortunately, I was still in good shape. I've been a college athlete and that, and I carried that through. I was still working out and things like that. But believe it or not, there were there was a Navy veteran who was in his 40s in my academy class, and there was a former insurance agent who was in his 50s that was also in my academy class. So I was not the oldest person in my class.
That's that's crazy to and there's this TV show called The Rookie. I don't know if you ever saw that or heard of it, but
I've heard of it. Yes, I've not seen it though.
I mean, it's practically an older guy who becomes a cop and is like, what the hell,
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, yeah, but that's a huge testament to your staying the course, following your dream, accomplishing your vision, because you wanted to do this in your heart. You wanted to be that guy.
I did. And I'll be honest with you, as much as being, at Wendy's and being in hospital administration wasn't my purpose, I learned from that. I learned how to talk to people. And
Sure.
I think that's one of the biggest things, being in law enforcement isn't a very desirable field today. But every now and then somebody will reach out and say, what do you recommend? And what I always tell them to do is like, put your devices down and go out on the street and talk to the homeless guy, and go up to the penthouse and talk to that person. Because if you can talk to people as a police officer, you can be successful. If you can't, if the only way you can communicate is on that little box, and text somebody, then you're not going to be successful and you're not going to be happy in that. And so it was just something I got some maturity, I got some years under my belt, and I think that helped me to be a better police officer.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I worked in corrections, and we followed the same model of thinking as you, in that in order to have a successful day, a successful career, you need to learn how to talk to people, and we're dealing with, inmates every day. So it's like, you got to understand these guys committed crimes, but at the end of the day, they're still people.
Yes.
And you have to approach them as such.
Yes.
So for me, that transition was great because, I've never had a problem talking with inmates. I don't like to call them, inmates, but it is what it is.
Sure.
So I had a few hiccups here and there with people who were just being, hard-headed or, whatever, belligerent, whatever you want to call it. But overall, I can definitely say that because of my ability to talk with people and not talk to people, you see the difference. It created a very great career for me. So I get what you're saying on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I always tried to remember was, if I pulled you over, for running a stop sign or speeding or something like that, I always tried to remember that, for you, that may be the scariest thing that happens to you all year, but for me, it's the third traffic stop of the night. And you sort of have to keep that in perspective. These are human beings. And, when those blue and red lights go on and somebody approaches your car and, they're in uniform, it's scary. It's intimidating. And I get that. And you always want to go home at the end of the shift. I'm sure you will agree with me there. But at the same time, you don't need to have that bravado, that machismo, right out of the gate. If the person wants to go there, I'll be happy to, to go there. But that's not where you need to start, because it doesn't give you any place to go. If you start up here, it's like, I got no place to go. I mean, if you start down here, I can always go up, but why can't we just interact as human beings and stuff? So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Right. How long were you a police officer?
10 years.
I saw that you worked SWAT. How was that?
Yeah, I was a hostage negotiator on the SWAT team. And you know this. I mean, usually SWAT teams on police departments, sheriff's departments, whoever it is, those are usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. And I always in my life wanted to be part of the best. And so when there was an opening, I put in for it, and I was easy in my 40s, when this was going on. And, there was a physical fitness requirement. You had to run a mile and a half. You had to do so many push-ups, sit-ups.
Right.
You had to meet with the psychologist and take psychological exams and meet with the command staff. And it was it was an all or nothing there. I mean, the team then would vote. And if one person said, hey, I've worked with Terry before, he's difficult or he's hard to deal with, then you didn't get on the team. And so I went through the whole process and was lucky enough, fortunate enough to get on the team and worked with great people, learned a lot about communication, how we communicate, not just police officers and civilians, but how we communicate with each other as human beings that I still, even today, employ in my life.
Awesome. That's awesome. I noticed too that after your stint with the police force, you moved to Houston. What made you move to Houston from Cincinnati?
Yeah, so yeah, another backstory story kind of thing. So my wife has always been the primary breadwinner in our family. And like I said, she married me when I was a suit and tie, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday kind of guy as a hospital administrator. And when we got married, we moved to Santa Barbara, California. And there was a circular that came in the mail, and it was from Santa Barbara City College. And I never looked at these things. But for some reason that day, I was paging through it, and there was a course that you could take that was put on by, it was a sergeant from the Santa Barbara Police Department, that if you passed it, you could apply to be a reserve officer with any agency within the state of California. So you can imagine that conversation at dinner that night. It was like, hey, honey, would you mind if and my wife was incredibly supportive. She's like, yeah, try it. And so I took the course, I passed, I got on with Santa Barbara PD, and I was a customer service manager for an academic publishing company at the time. And so I would work all week in my regular job. I'd come home Friday night, put on my uniform, and I would go to roll call, and I would work all night. And my wife tells the story much better than I do. But she said you would come home Saturday morning exhausted because you'd been up for more than 24 hours, but you would have this incredible smile, this incredible grin on your face. And so when our daughter was born and we moved to Cincinnati, I was like, hon, I want to do this full time. And so she supported me. And then when she lost her job in Cincinnati, it was my time to support her. It was like, okay, I love doing this. I think this is my calling, but it's not who I am. So if you need to find another job, she did. She found that job in Houston. And so we moved the family to Houston. And I started a school security consulting business based on what I knew from my law enforcement career, my SWAT career, and my education and background.
Nice. And now I also noticed on your resume that you dealt with cancer, or as you wrote, genius. Can you pronounce that?
Yeah, acrolitiginous melanoma.
Litiginous melanoma. How was that process for you? I mean, that must have been scary as hell.
It is, because I'm still dealing with it. Yeah, 2012, I had my consulting business. I was also coaching girls high school basketball, and I had a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And initially didn't think much of it because as a basketball coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But, fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, in all honesty, Mark, the more frightened I was becoming, until he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years, and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have this incredibly rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun. It affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin.
Sure.
Mine has nothing to do with that. Mine is a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And in 2012, when I was diagnosed, I was told that more than likely I would be dead in 2 years because they had nothing to offer me other than surgery. And I thought, well, you just gave me a death sentence. Maybe I can turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And so I was on a drug called interferon for 5 years. I had my foot amputated in 2018. I had my leg amputated right in the middle of COVID in 2020. And I still have tumors in my lungs that I'm treated for at the hospital every 3 years. So my disease at best is chronic. In other words, I'll have it for the rest of my life,
Right.
or at worst is terminal, which is probably more likely since, there are things that they can do, but for me, it's never going to go away.
Sure. How was the chemo treatments? I mean, did they make it worse, make it better for a while, or did it swing back and forth? I mean, how was that?
So initially they gave me a drug called interferon. They're like, we don't have anything for you. So we're going to put you on this sort of catch-all drug called interferon, which basically wipes out anything that doesn't belong in your body, colds, flu, whatever. The
Okay.
side effects of the interferon were that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. So I took a weekly injection and I had a terrible case of the flu for 2 or 3 days. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And as my oncologist used to say, this isn't a cure, Terry. This is just, we're trying to kick the can down the road and buy you more time for more things to become available. And honestly, Mark, there were days where I prayed to die. I was so sick of being sick that
Yeah.
it was like, look, God, this isn't living. This is just not dying.
Right.
And I asked to be out of that. And he didn't take me out of it, obviously. He kept me going through it. And
Praise
5 years into this, I end up in the intensive care unit with a fever, a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. That was due to the toxicity for the interferon. So I had to stop it. And almost immediately, the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it presented. That necessitated my foot being amputated.
Right. Right.
Cancer worked its way up my leg. I'm getting to the answer to your question. It's just sort of a long process.
Take your time. Take your time.
And so 2019, 2 more surgeries in my shin as the cancer worked its way up. And then in 2020, I found out I had tumors in my lungs and my entire lower leg was full of cancer. And so I had to have my leg amputated. And after my leg amputation, my doctor wanted to put me on chemotherapy. And I remember saying to him, is it going to save my life? And he said, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I told him, I said, look, if the outcome is going to be the same, if I'm going to die anyway, I would rather die having some good time with my family and my friends and not be sick as a dog all the time.
Yeah.
But you'll love this story, kind of a funny story. I went home and I said, look, I'll talk to my family about it. So I go home, it's just my wife and daughter and I. And so I go home and I start telling them what the doctor wants to do. And my daughter's immediately, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that.
Right.
And so we sit around the kitchen table and individually talk about how we feel about me having chemo. And then after that, my daughter was like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something I don't want to do? But I remembered when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we love the most to class. And as we were learning to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I took chemo not because I wanted to, but I took chemo because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, that was the bridge that got me to the clinical trial drug that has been keeping my tumors at bay for the last 3 years now.
Let's go back. I want to hear that quote again. It's better to fight for those you love.
You will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself.
Man.
That's a great quote, isn't it?
Man. Wow. Yeah. That I had to bring you back to that because that hit me.
Yeah.
And people don't get that sometimes you have to put yourself out of the equation. and really focus on those who freaking care about you. You know what I mean? If we did that, I think it would bring so much more value to the relationships that people are experiencing, because I think in certain respects there is this me versus you thing, and that causes so much turmoil in relationship. But once you put you out of the equation, I mean, for both people, really, and just say, hey, I love you and I'm here for you and I'll fight for you.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That brings so much more love to it, genuine
It,
love to it.
It does. It makes you understand what's important in life. And
Yeah.
it's not money, it's not power, it's not
No.
influence, it's relationships.
Man.
And as I mentioned, I'm still being treated for these tumors in my lungs. And one of
Mhm.
the nurses who cares for me is a former hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice care, it's end of life care. It's
It's
people
in
who
game.
take
Yeah.
care of people at the end of their lives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she's now working in the infusion center, giving me my trial drug. And she recommended a book to me. And the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near-death experiences. And there's a lot of interesting things in there. But one of the most interesting things I found was no matter who the person was that had this near-death experience, whoever they saw, whether it was, Allah or Jesus or a saint or an angel or a friend or a family member, the
Mhm.
one question that almost every single one of them was asked was, how do you treat my people? Not, did you cheat on your wife or did you embezzle from your company or did you steal from your neighbor? Not that you should do those things, but the one question everybody was asked is just what you said. How do we take care of each other? The relationships that we have with each other. And that's what's important. I mean, you think of what's the greatest commandment? Love, have no other gods other than me, love God above yourself. And what's the second? Love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really what, if you can keep those two, you're good with everything else.
Man.
You really are. I mean, if you can love your neighbor, that's really what you're talking about. The relationships, the connections that we have with each other.
Amen. Amen to that, man. Man, Imagine Heaven is the book.
Yeah, imagine having a great book you would enjoy. I mean, one of the other things that I found interesting about it is that people that are born totally deaf or totally blind,
Hmm.
if they have a near-death experience, they can see and they can hear, which is
Say what?
amazing. Yeah, they can see and they can hear, but then they come back into their body and they're
Right.
either blind or deaf again. Can you imagine how frustrating that must be for them?
But it's a beautiful thing at the same time, because
Isn't it?
they got to see something that we couldn't see.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We
Yep.
can't see what they saw. So they'll have that in their brains for the rest of their lives.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. I just learned something today. Speaking of books, you wrote a book.
It did.
Talk about the title of that book. It's a long title, so
Yeah.
I'll
The
let you
book is
say
called,
it.
yeah, Sustainable Excellence. And then the subtitle is 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life.
What made you write the book?
Uh, I never wanted to write a book, to be perfectly honest with you. And there's kind of an old joke that says, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God
Yes.
talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never talked to me at all. But I think what God did was put enough people in my path that were making the same suggestion. You should write a book. 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 And I think I'm smart enough when things like that happen that I need to pay attention to that
Attention.
sort of message that's being delivered. And
Yes.
so the book was really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who'd moved the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close now and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Mark, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, coach, what do you think my purpose is? And I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, and there is a reason, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man from college reach out to me on social media, and he asked me what I thought were the most important things that he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all know. Wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time and I was taking some notes, and eventually kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And then I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the 4 or 5 months that I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how the book came to be.
Awesome. That's awesome. When you got your leg amputated, Terry, what was the first thing that came through your mind?
It was such a hard thing for me because it happened in the middle of COVID. So no surgeries were being done unless it was an absolute emergency. But I had a tumor kind of in the lower part of my leg that had grown large enough that it basically broke my leg. It fractured my tibia. And so I wasn't going to heal. You weren't going to put me in a cast and my bone was going to heal. So my doctor had to get special permission to do the surgery. And I remember the morning of the surgery, my wife dropped me off at the hospital. I was not allowed to have anybody with me for the surgery. A nurse was waiting for me with a wheelchair, wheeled me back, to this great big pre-op room that's, like 30 different bays, all designed to be prepping all kinds of people for surgery. Yeah. And Mark, I was the only person in that whole big room. It was me, a nurse, and an anesthesiology resident. I mean, I wanted to run. I wanted to get the heck out of there. Yeah. And I was told that I would be in the hospital for 10 days, 10 to 14 days to learn how to function without a leg. Because I have an above the knee amputation. And they sent me home after 48 hours because of COVID. They're like, we just got to get you out of here. I'm like, you just cut my leg off. Yeah, I don't care. Get out of here. Yeah. And it was scary. It was, I mean, I hadn't even controlled the pain yet from the surgery. And they're like, go, get out of here, go home. And
just like that.
Yeah, just literally just like that. You're being discharged. Oh, okay. Yeah, it was not like any surgery I'd ever had in my life, just because it was, so focused on me and everything that, all the support system that you would have for certainly a major surgery. You're going to lose an appendage. I didn't have it. There was nobody there, to hold my hand. It was like, so you suck it up, Terry, get it done. It's got to get done. So you find a way.
I mean, that's textbook suck it up buttercup, Suck it up, man. Yeah. Take your ass home.
That's right. That's right. Deal with it. Let's go. Come on. Right. Cut off. Let's go. Get in the car.
Hey, and in hindsight, it's like, it's better to lose a leg than to lose your life.
It is.
Because people were just keeling over off of COVID, especially in the hospitals. Yeah. So, man, I mean, like I said, in hindsight, they probably saw something, like, hey, if this man is to live, he can't be in the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, the man just got his leg cut off, but I mean, let's weigh the options here,
Exactly.
So,
yeah, I couldn't believe it when they came in. It's like, you're being discharged. I'm like, wait a minute. I just had my leg cut off. Yeah, we know. Go home. So,
go home. What did your wife say about that? I'm sure she was like, just
my wife is tough as nails. I mean, and I would be dead many times over if it hadn't been for her during this journey. We were also lucky that the occupational therapist that had been working with us agreed to come to our house after she got off work of her own volition. She was just kind enough, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm just going to show up and I'll help you figure out your house so that, for somebody who's in a wheelchair and using a walker and things like that. So thank God for her coming and helping us, because we were like, we don't know. I mean, she's like, get rid of that rug. It's a trip hazard, or, that kind of stuff. So she was great. And my wife, like I said, we may not like it, but we'll figure it out. I mean, we're not going to whine and complain about it. We're just going to get it done.
Amen. So how's your faith, Terry?
Huge, huge. I absolutely, I mentioned earlier when I was on interferon that I prayed to die, and I really did. And faith is always, I talk about my 3 F's: faith, family, and friends, which are in that order: faith. And I remember when I had my leg amputated, and about 6 months later, I was getting ready to start chemotherapy, and my doctor showed me my CAT scan. And I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan, but you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, that doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces. I was coughing up green, bloody phlegm.
Oh,
and I remember looking at my oncologist and saying, how was I alive? And Mark, I will never forget this till the day I die. He put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been. Which said to me that God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about the dying. Spend much more time focusing on the living.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And for some people, it takes that experience for them to really like embrace life. Like, wow, life really isn't all that bad, and life really isn't that hard. We just make it hard. We make it hard. We do the dumb stuff that creates chaos. I don't know. I don't understand. And I'm not saying this for you to ask you a question, but it's just a thought. I don't understand why people make life so hard for themselves and for the people around them by the things that they do and say. It boggles my mind. It's like, I'm in my 50s, and I'm coming to the realization that things could be so simpler and enjoyable, but people just choose to do dumb stuff, and it takes an accident, I don't know, getting shot. It takes some travesty to make them realize, like, damn, life really is just freaking simple, and it can be enjoyed. But slow your ass down and just really just enjoy it.
Absolutely. And I think, you mentioned before about service, and we talked about connection and stuff like that. And this may or may not answer your question, but the way I've seen people in life is that so many people think they're born empty, and that when they get out of school and get into life, whatever that looks like for them, that then they feel their job is to fill their empty self up. I've got to get the best education and have the greatest job, make the most money, drive the nicest car, have the latest gadgets and gizmos. And what I found, Mark, is we're not born empty. It's just the opposite. We're born full. We're born with everything we need to be successful in life already inside us. We just need to find it and pull it out and use it for our benefit. But so many people feel that by filling themselves up, somehow they're going to be self-actualized and happy and fulfilled and all that. But there's always one more gadget. There's always one more thing that, well, if I get that, then I'll be happy. Well, I got that and I'm still not happy. So what I find is, instead of filling yourself up, your job in life should be to empty yourself out with your unique gifts and talents, certainly for the betterment of yourself, but also for the betterment of your family, your friends, your community, your country, etc. And I think when you change that paradigm, when you flip that switch and realize it's not about what I can get, it's about what I can give, your entire life changes in an instant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. I mean, I have nothing because you said it all, Terry. You're a speaker now, correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny because I started a speaking business, another brilliant, don't take business advice from me, right as COVID hit, and like so many other people, I had to figure out a different way to deliver the message because, nobody was doing anything either virtually or in person. And a
Hmm.
friend of mine reached out and said, "Hey, would you like to be a guest on my podcast?" And I said, "Sure. What's a podcast?" I mean, literally, I had no idea what a podcast was. And he told me. And I said, "Well, I'll give it a try." And Mark, I was terrible. I had post-it notes all around the camera, and he would ask me a question. I'd kind of lean in, read a post-it note. I was horrible. I provided no value to anybody during that podcast, but I kind of liked it. And I thought, I mean, think about it. The first time we ever drove a car, were we any good at it? Well, I know
No,
I wasn't. I
no.
mean, the first time I cooked a meal, I think I burned the water. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
the first time I studied algebra, was I any good at it? No. So I wanted to get good at it. So now it's a matter of do you, and I do. I remember talking to my publisher. I said, "Scott, I listen to every podcast I've ever been on because I want to see if I can get a better story for a particular point." I remember somebody told me one time, never make a point without telling a story, and never tell a story without making a point. And I love that. I love that message. So, can I have better stories? Can I, how many times do I say or huh or use those filler words? I want to be a better guest so that the host feels and the audience feels that this was time well spent. And I mean, well over 600 podcasts later, I am really enjoying this and hopefully bringing value to the people who listen to the podcast where I'm a guest.
Sure, sure. And you know, just being your authentic self is bringing value. People can see when you're on, pardon my expression, but people can see when you're on bullshit.
Yeah.
And people can see when you're just being authentically you. And when you do that, I mean, that I think that raises the antenna for people. It's like, okay, this is who he is.
Yeah.
No lies, no showing off, no big words. This is just me.
Yeah.
I'm
Warts
bringing
and
my
all.
message. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, all of it. Hymns, haws, whatever. This is me. You can take it or not, but I'm going to stay in my lane. And I'm going to be me, and that's what I see in you. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So what's next for you, Terry?
So I'm working on a second book. Sustainable Excellence was a book about success, at least how I thought people could be successful in their life.
Mm.
I'm writing another book now about another word that also begins with S, and that is significance. Success is what we do for ourselves. Significance is what we do for others. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think you can be both. You can be successful and significant in your
Sure,
life,
sure.
but I'm spending a lot of time putting that together. I just finished the second draft of it. I'm not comfortable with it now. And when you write a book the first time, you're just dumb. You don't know what you're doing, and like, I'm just writing a book. That's great. Now you know what makes a good book. And it's your responsibility as an author to write something that's going to want to make that person turn that page, and keep reading and keep going on. So again, I'm under no time constraint. I don't have an editor or a publisher that's like, I need this by a certain time. So I'm spending as much time as I need to get it to where I want to be. So I'm doing that. I'm starting to do more speaking. I just had a book published. There was a book published a couple months ago that I wrote a chapter in, which just came out. And so I enjoy the writing part, and I'm still doing my podcast. So between the book writing, the podcasts, and the other writing I'm doing, and then being treated for cancer,
Okay.
it makes for a full day.
Good, good. What's the title of your podcast, Terry?
I don't have my own podcast. I just am guesting on other
Oh, you're
people's. Yeah.
okay. Understood, understood. How can people reach you, Terry?
So I have a blog / website called Motivational Check. That's a whole nother story from back in the police academy days. Every day I put up a thought for the day. With that thought usually comes a question about how maybe you could apply the thought in your life. I have recommendations for books to read, videos to watch, You can get access to my social media links, and you can leave me a message, and that's all at motivationalcheck.com.
Motivationalcheck.com. Terry Tucker, it's been a pleasure having you on my show, sir. I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate your journey, and may God bless you on your, your journey still, because like you said, God's not done with you yet, my brother.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully our conversation is going to provide value to your audience. And if it does, today's been a good day.
Oh, today is a good day. We're talking. We're talking. So today is
absolutely.
A good day. We're up and breathing, brother. So today is a good day.
That's true. We're on this side of the dirt, right? So.
All right, Terry. You have yourself a good evening, sir.
Thank you. You do the same.
All right. You take care of yourself.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye now.